Just because something is faster doesn't mean it's of quality. Just because you have a lot of something doesn't mean it's high quality. So it's a balance of having rocket fuel in your process from AI is amazing and absolutely leverage that. But that does not mean that you're going to get the quality outcomes that you're going for. And in fact, it means you're going to have to be 10 times better at being an editor, at being a curator, because that speed can generate so much that is actually not of use or that has been done before.
What we design and how we design are changing because of AI. It's happening faster than anyone could imagine. Our guest, Sara Vienna, has been designing a new relationship with AI, and she's been doing it for years ahead of others. She's the Chief Design Officer at Metalab, one of the top design consultancies in the world. She leads exceptional design talent who are leveraging AI to its fullest. Sara has shaped the technology landscape for some of the biggest brands in the world and tomorrow's disruptors.
We've got a great responsibility. It's not time to move fast and break things. You can break things in your own safe little sandbox, and I recommend doing that. But what we don't want to break things at a cultural level. And if you're releasing something out into the world that can hurt people, that has the potential to, it's not the question of like, oh, what's the happiest path? You also have to ask the question of what's the worst thing that could happen?
This is episode 26, and we're discussing designing a new relationship with AI. This is the most important episode yet because we discuss shifting our mindsets about AI, design, and value creation. That just because something is faster doesn't mean it's of quality. The great responsibility of designers to question our work. To challenge yourself and experiment or you'll get left behind. And that consumers will put money towards experiences that are valuable. As the Chief Design Officer, Sara leads Metalab's research, strategy, and design to ship best-in-class products. Metalab, recently listed as one of Fast Company's Design Companies of the Year, made its name designing for companies like Slack, Uber, Pitch, Instacart, and Headspace. The team continues to leave its mark across emerging startups and household names such as Suno, Midjourney, Nike, Pika, and The Atlantic. Sara is also an advisor to Metalab's venture fund companies, helping early-stage startups become the next unicorn. She lives on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, with her family, including 2 rescue fur babies. Follow Sara and Metalab on LinkedIn at Sara Vienna and Metalab.
If your passion for this work starts to dwindle, you need to take a break. If your passion for solving the problem all of a sudden is not clear, you got to take a break. You've got to think of another way to challenge whatever you've got going on inside back to getting that energy towards problem solving. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself left behind. And managers see it.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide a pragmatic and practical deep dive into what AI can do and how it's transforming industries. We help designers, researchers, and product managers excel in a rapidly changing future. If you find this strategic content helpful, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcasting app. It really helps us if you leave reviews.
Thank you, Sara, for joining us. Our conversation today will be about where design is heading in the future. So you've had an amazing career, you've worked on some really interesting projects. How have you seen design and the design material changing over your career?
I don't want to make this an answer that I designed uphill both ways in the snow. So that's definitely not the answer. But, I'm a traditional graphic designer. I was trained by some of the best. And while I went to portfolio school and all of those things, I actually learned my experience on the job. So I've designed everything from brand identity, I hand-coded websites back in the day, magazines, books. I even designed makeup early in my career. And when you think about that application of design across the spectrum, it's really important to take the great tenets of graphic design and apply them no matter what your design problem is. I'm a big believer in that. I think if designers don't have those foundations, they can make decisions in design that actually are anti-aesthetic or just bad for humans. And so having the foundations of graphic design is something that's super important. That still stays the same, but the material that we're designing is so different now, right? So when we're designing for digital experiences, the tools that we're using obviously are very different. The ways that we're collaborating are super different. And I think that one of the most important things to think about is, how do I create space for the collaboration and the work that I need to do with my peers, while I also save time for heads down time to think for myself? And it's something that I'm very passionate about, of having those distinct areas so that you can do your best thinking, but also bring all of those amazing solutions to the table. So while the material we may be designing with and for changes, the tenets of best practices still don't change. And I'm very much a break the rules if there's a reason to person. And I also still think that if you don't have a background in aesthetics and graphic design, it's going to be problematic for you, and you're going to have a hard time making some of those decisions that can tend to be informed by data, but also intuition and gut.
That's beautiful. And now, Brittany and I, we met Metalab, oh gosh, it was probably 2015, 2016. We were all based in BC. You guys were doing some interesting stuff. We kind of jammed back then. And, fast forward, Luke, the CEO, was posting
Yeah.
about all this amazing AI stuff you've been up to the last couple of years. And it literally blew my mind. I cannot believe these guys from West Coast of Canada have been doing this. Now, what really elevated my thinking even more was reading an article that you wrote for Metalab called Designing a New Relationship with AI.
Yeah.
That article is equal parts visionary, pragmatic, practical. It's beautifully written and it's immensely powerful because it's so true and actionable in a lot of ways. Why was it important for you to write this piece right now?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for those kind words, by the way. And Metalab, the last decade, I'd say we've been like the best kept secret in tech, right? And a lot of people, when they find out where we're from and where our roots are, oh, it's, these very sweet little Canadians out of BC. And we are a global team. We've got designers from Australia to Amsterdam as an example, but those roots and a little bit of that like Canadian sort of quiet confidence still exists with us. So we're really careful about when we do put things out into the world. And I think when I was thinking about writing that article, it was percolating for me for a long time. And it became a situation where I felt like if I don't say something, then there's a vacuum here, because there is a lot of fear based content out there of design basically like being eaten by AI, right? And on the other side, a lot of content that's just only sunshine and roses and doesn't look at the realities. I'm an optimist at heart. That's the only way I can actually do this job and be a designer, is because of my optimism and wanting to help people. And helping people can have a very different variety of definitions when you think about it. But I don't think, honestly, AI should exist if it doesn't help people. And so when I was thinking about it, I can't put something out in the world that doesn't feel authentic to me, right? And when I think about the harm potential, but also the potential for good, those two things and holding that tension is, I think, where most of us as designers are right now. And so teasing out the things that actually can give designers tangible ways to design for value, to design for differentiation, to design for experiences that reach people on an emotional level, that was my goal. And I still think we're in a really nascent stage, of course. And so if we don't set the foundations now as an industry, then we will definitely go down a path that will be detrimental. But if we make some agreements together as we go forward and are driven by values, then ultimately I think we can design amazing things that are going to solve real human problems. So that was my goal with the article. I'm glad it resonated.
I love that. I think for myself, so I'm a researcher, but I work on a strategy team and, in an agency and with big brands. And I'm constantly having this like push pull of, yes, you have clients who need to make money, and yes, they need to be sustainable in the long run and whatnot. And they're really excited by this. But even in the words that we choose to use in how we put forward a strategy or a vision or even features, it's like we need to choose words that reflect the humanity and the experience and the value that it's creating and having like true value. not just saying, oh, we will, make something easier or remove time. It's like, what is true value that someone actually needs in this? And so I think for me, that's why I also loved that you refer to it not as, pillars or a structure or a design system. And instead, it's really rooted in that behavioral shift of mindsets. So, major mindsets. And I thought that was really powerful because that's not something that designers can get behind. That's something that everybody who's working in this space can get behind and can see the implications on users on the other side of that. For everyone who's listening, so the 5 major mindset shifts that you had articulated were going from overwhelming to curated, going from clickbait to valuable, going from questionable to trusted, from generic to unique, and from rigid to generative. The brands have been promising consumers those qualities and those capacities for a really long time. So, why do you believe that now is the time that it's actually possible to shift to being more curated, valuable, trusted, unique, and generative?
When you think about it, these are forces that, as a designer, and all of us, we're not billionaires. And AI is happening, whether we like it or not. And I'm not a believer in letting things just happen to you. I'm a believer in owning part of the conversation and driving a definition of the future that I want to live in, but I also design, right? And so when you think about that, it's like, right, like I get to work with some of these people every day, and their goal is obviously to make a sustainable business in this capitalist economy. So when you think about that, that's like, okay, that's a real reality, right? And what we need to do is actually change the definition of value, because I still think we own that. As consumers, we put our money where we see value. So instead of buying in, for example, to the networks that put AI slop all over, how about you put your money and your engagement and your attention into things that bring true value, right? Now, that takes education, that takes awareness. A lot of us who are in the space right now can see the AI slop and are almost blind to it, right? But the vast majority of people are seeing that right now and actually don't know the difference. And that I think is very dangerous. But if we change the incentive and if we start putting our money where our values are, I think that companies will follow suit. And that's very much what we drive our clients to when we work with the amazing humans that we work with at Metalab, is creating value for people that also benefits them as humans. And that value creation, consumers spend either their time and engagement or money on experiences that bring them value. And so if we can continue to design products that people trust, design products that cut through the noise, design products that are differentiated and unique, we can actually design something that's going to push us forward rather than hold us back or divide us.
I like that. Do you feel then, your own personal opinion, that this is a liminal moment of AI changing what we can design? Or do you think it's about designers rewiring themselves and getting back to those core values?
Whenever I hear a question like this, it's funny because I'm like, both, right? I think that designers absolutely have to rewire themselves. And some of them you can see that live, especially if you're one of those people who are, wow, there's so much going on in social, I'm overwhelmed by it. You don't have to tune into all of that. All you have to do is kick the tires in the way that you see fit. And that sense of experimentation and the joy in like making little experiments and learning from them, that's what I think we need to do. And there's so many designers right now that do that naturally. So it's taking that spirit and applying it to where you're going in your career today. Because honestly, if you don't try these tools, even if you're not able to apply them in your day to day work yet, you will be left behind. But I guarantee the more you try them, the more you learn to use them, the more you're actually going to see the tangible application to your work. And if you marry that with, like we were talking about on the upfront, a reverence for aesthetics, like really caring deeply about style and what looks good and what functions well, you're going to be able to make yourself a really important part of a potential design team or even individual contributor or freelancer, because you've got this arsenal and ways to solve problems that will be better and faster. So there is that change that designers do have to accept. And I very much believe so. Change is constant, right? There were big changes that happened in our industry when everybody started co-designing, right? And designing in the browser. And so when you think about both, it's also thinking about how can I set myself up for success, right? It's rewiring, but it's also changing what you can design. That's what I really say. It's both, because you can design for AI, and designing for AI is when we get to that idea of fluidity of generation, of not being constricted by pixel perfection anymore, and figuring out how do I map this result set that could be super varied and present that in an experience that's actually still beautiful, usable, and something that people will actually feel has a little bit of magic in it. Because right now, if you don't map what those magic moments are in the experience and really celebrate them, they'll get left behind. And so our job as designers is to find that simple human truth of when you might find that magic and figure out the best way to get there as quickly as possible. And then being able to obviously sell that to your business stakeholders.
It's beautiful. Now, if we look at these 5 mindset shifts you're talking about, which of them would you say were the closest to actually being able to achieve? And which would you say were the furthest away and still haven't figured out how to put the pieces
Mm,
together?
oh, that's a really good question. I think the curated element is one of the closest to achieve. And the reason why is that anyone who's savvy wants simplicity, personalization. They don't want things that aren't relevant to them. And so we're going to have to tune relevance into the way that we present our experiences. And people are just going to absolutely demand it at a certain point. And so, because of all of the clickbait, AI slop garbage out there, there's so much noise. I think that's going to come very quickly and become in demand to the point where people will issue experiences that don't tune to them. That is something that we can already see today. And so I think that that's very near term. I think the longer term, the two that I think we really need to work on are trust and generative experiences. Trust is inherently problematic when we think about the problems that we're seeing across the space right now in misinformation. I'm not here to call out any specific network or here to call out any specific experiences or products, but misinformation is a big problem. And people should take a look and triple check those experiences before they're trusted. And as designers, it's behooving upon us to design for that trust, right? To design to build it over time. And so when you think about getting to trust, that will be a cycle. And when something happens where people are in some way, shape, or form not treated well, right? Like you will see that the mistrust skyrocket. But if we can design for trust and treat people, apply the golden rule across the experiences that we design and ship, trust will be built over time. But it does take time. So that's one. And you can see it tangibly. And for example, think about companions. I don't know if you've seen that Andreessen Horowitz bar graph, but those are the most engaged with mobile apps right now are companions, which is fascinating because I think what that starts to do is show you that there is a gap. There's a loneliness epidemic and there is a gap in companionship, and people are seeking out companionship. And there's a variety of definitions of what that companionship actually is. If you think of companion AI apps, and then you think about trust, how quickly do you get to trust with those? And how heavy is our responsibility as designers and makers to make sure that we don't exploit people when we have earned that trust? So that's a really, really big one for me. And the second one is a bit more just about the mechanics and the overall general nerdiness of being product designers. And that's designing interfaces that generate and respond to the result sets just in time. And we're still at the very early days of that. What we're going to start to see are those rigid design systems, rigid brand books are going to start to be challenged by the way that these result sets present themselves, because we're going to have to design for fluidity in a way that I think is going to challenge a lot of us who are control freaks with design. That's another one that I think we have to work on really thoughtfully as a community.
With these 5 mindset shifts, I'm sure designers have asked you a lot of questions, perhaps pushed back on how to achieve some of these, or perhaps what steps they should take to do it. Do you have any advice on what the starting point should be on what to do with these lessons you put forward in your article?
Yeah, I think to this point, it also becomes like it's a little bit of a blank slate syndrome as designers sometimes, right? I also think that with AI tooling and everything we have at our disposal, you don't necessarily have to start from a blank slate. But when you're looking at the design problem you're trying to solve, the most important thing to do in the beginning is to define that happy path. What is that path that gets the user from A, the problem, to B, the solution? And how do we design something that feels seamless along that path? The seamless is just table stakes. It needs to be easy, it needs to be simple, just in time. But the places that really matter, and this is where the article really hits on it, is finding the magic moments along that path. So when we think about an experience that could be sort of, just genericized, how do we make sure that we curate that path for the user to get them to their end goal? And even if the end goal is just exploration, right? How do we make sure that we've got enough information about the user so that we can present something that's ultimately super relevant to them? That's the first thing. The thing that's also really tough about that is that you've got to be able to build trust to get that data to present relevance. So, how do you build trust and get just enough information so that you can create a valuable experience to the user? And asking those questions is how you get there. Because I can't give you a lightning rod today and say, here is the magic, here is the recipe. The magic is in the process of figuring out those big, potentially $1 million questions. And as you look through that process and continue to design things, sometimes you should design something and look at it and just take a real hard look and say, you know what? That's not the solution. That's not what I would want to use. You can test it, you can double check, and also think about what is the thing that's going to be the game changer in this experience so that it's super differentiated and unique. That whole line of thinking and line of questioning is how you get to experiences that are best in class, how you get to ones that are the ones on everybody's minds that everybody's talking about. And so there's not one methodology to do that. And in this article, I don't outline that because there is no lightning rod answer. It's a way of thinking, and it's almost a design philosophy that you have to own yourself. And you have to make sure that you are advocating for it every step of the way with your teams to get to the solution that you're super proud of. Because if you're not proud of it, number one, it's not going to be successful. I can almost guarantee. And having questions throughout the way to sense check yourself and your team are the way that we get to the ideal experience towards the outcome that we're designing for.
You talk a lot about questioning things. And in the article, you talk about a relationship with AI and being in denial and feelings of not enough. And I need to ask you, as the author and the expert in this case, is this an AI problem, or is this a problem of what design has become?
That's a great question. I think AI has given us an identity crisis. I'll be honest. Like, AI has made us take a really cold, hard look at ourselves. It's made the people who pay us take a cold, hard look and ask, what is the value of this contributor? It's business. And the faster we get to understanding that and not taking that personally, I think the better off you will be. That's number one. Second, I think looking at that from the lens of, am I changing or is AI changing me? It's both, right? We're in this cycle of perpetual change. AI is bringing this faster than ever. Just like the computer changed graphic design forever, we are now changing product design with AI at breakneck speed. So what we need to do is think about how might we make ourselves indispensable in a moment when this is changing what we do inherently at the core, and how do we continue to design experiences that help businesses win, because that's what this is about, designing winning products that also are value aligned with me as a human.
In the 100 plus conversations I've had in the last year about AI, the key value driver everyone brings up is speed, getting things done faster. Is this actually what AI is going to help us with? Or is it that we just haven't had the imagination to think of really where the true value is going to come from? Is it that we haven't figured out how to really extract the quality in terms of creativity, divergent thinking, or anything like this? We can talk about the speed all we want, but in the real world, there's only so much speed we actually need. Where do you see the value coming from in terms of AI? And is it simply only speed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Speed is a benchmark, just like quality is a benchmark. But just because something is faster doesn't mean it's of quality. Just because you have a lot of something doesn't mean it's high quality. So it's a balance of, yeah, like having rocket fuel in your process from AI is amazing and absolutely leverage that. But that does not mean that you're going to get the quality outcomes that you're going for. And in fact, it means you're going to have to be 10 times better at being an editor, at being a curator, because that speed can generate so much that is actually not of use or that has been done before. Because think about it, like these models are built off of existing knowledge right now, right? These models are built off of what has been done before. Therefore, you're going to get outputs that are a mashup of what's been done before. So, what you need to do is think about, how do I add that layer of novelty, of differentiation, and of quality as I leverage the value of getting speed into the process? And that's the big question. Those who are able to do that effectively will be 10 times more valuable and 10 times stronger as designers and makers.
So, point number two in your article is moving from the attention economy to the meaning economy. You write, the previous era of tech is marked by growth at all costs. Move fast and break things. It's too risky for today. That we wanted to deliver real value. Now, at the same time, we're talking about speed and how AI enables us to get more done faster, and that we just need to come to terms with this new rocket under our butts, basically, that enables us to get more stuff done. How do we
Yeah.
reconcile the need to get better work done and also faster? How can we as designers and researchers and product people do both at the same time?
Here's the thing, with great power comes great responsibility. And these tools have great power. And something that I think about a lot, and I always apologize when it's like, don't always want to bring a Steve Jobs quote into it, but there are so many things that he said throughout the years that are incredibly important to frame up this new world that we're designing into, right? He said that computers are like a bicycle for the mind. And I've had many conversations with friends, and one of my friends, his name is Ravi Mehta, incredible product thinker. He said that AI is like a motorcycle for the mind, right? And you can get on that ride, to your point. And there are a lot of people, you can see some amazing voices out there who are very much on that ride, and they're almost making this cult of personality about it. That's one end of the spectrum. And the other end is like highly questioning the entire thing. And I think that to me, the place to live in is to adopt it, but realize the consequences of being on that motorcycle, right? If we move too fast and if we don't think critically about the decisions that we're making as we're making these new products and experiences, we could fall off and get hurt. We could hurt other people. And I know that designers got into this profession, yes, of course, to have a great career and make money. But designers are not here to exploit people or hurt people. Designers are here to make the human experience better. And so, because we still get to be the authors of these experiences, we do have a great responsibility in this moment. And my charge to the design community is to continue to hone your skills, make yourself indispensable. So we're still the owners of that experience. and continuing to own that experience by having a point of view, by having an amazing portfolio that you continue to work on, by making sure that you're honing your relationships and continuing to figure out the next step for your career to continue to drive what we're actually designing in AI. Because if you can become an advocate for that human experience, businesses will win when people see value, right? And you'll win because you're actually adding value and making somebody's life better. The heaviness that comes with that idea of we've got a great responsibility, it's not time to move fast and break things. You can break things in your own safe little sandbox, and I recommend doing that. But what we don't want to break things at a cultural level. And if you're releasing something out into the world that can hurt people, that has the potential to, it's not the question of like, oh, what's the happiest path? You also have to ask the question of what's the worst thing that could happen? Do I release this AI feature into my app, not to name names, that then starts to spew off things that are actually highly offensive to other people? Or are you not worried about people taking offense? Those are all decisions that designers and makers have to make as we get our values aligned right up with this motorcycle that's happening, whether we like it or not.
Please make sure to subscribe to our Substack to never miss an episode. On the Design of AI Substack, you'll also receive more strategic insights and recommended products, as well as announcing events soon to come. You can find us at designofai.substack.com.
Every startup is always trying to disrupt the industry, change how things work.
Mhm.
You've worked on several of these, whether it's Midjourney, Tally, Suno. What does that visioning, that design process look like when you quite literally are creating something that could break an industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I have to say that this is about the power of the collective and the power of my team. I am so lucky to have the most, I don't know, I'm biased, obviously. My team is so talented. And being able to lead a team who challenges me every day, who challenges clients every day, and whose only goal is to make it game changing is like a reason that I get up in the morning. And it's the reason that people hire us. So when thinking about working with some of the names that you listed there, the best ways of working in the ways that we've seen the most success are when we're side by side with them and you don't see a difference between their team and ours, and we just become one unit. Because we're a remote first company too, and depending on the client, some may be in the office, some may not be. What we end up doing is figuring out ways of working so that we can break those barriers down so that we're not as worried about what company do you work for and what title do you have. It's all about what have you made and what is the value in what you've made today and how have we pushed this project forward and this thinking forward. When you start to apply it to an industry, that's where it can be quite threatening for some that are actually in the industry and making their money via the ways that this AI might actually threaten them today. And you have to hold space for that. And you have to think about that critically. I think that working in an industry that challenges the norms and asks what could be if we democratize access to a thing, and AI is just the vehicle to that, right? It doesn't mean that every output is going to be amazing. It doesn't mean that they all can be bangers. But I'm a believer in democratizing access to the creative process. And so when we work with companies who are looking to do that, it's a very interesting space to play. Absolutely.
Now I'm looking at mind shift number 5, moving
Mhm.
from pixel perfect to generative systems. And I feel like designers probably really struggle with this one because they've been taught to do design well, that it's a craft, that you have an imprint that lasts in this experience. You have to think about the user, you have to think about the journey. It's a system, there's artifacts, it has to be beautiful. Now, defining what a generative system is, it's kind of complex. It's something that's uncertain, it's something that spins itself out, it's something that can't be QA'd. How do you help designers and product teams and clients imagine a world where products basically generate themselves?
I think this is one of the most interesting and challenging parts of product design right now. What I'll say is that craft is not just about pixels or the pixels being exactly so, or everything in its right place, as much as I like to design and listen to Radiohead in particular about everything being in its right place. It's more about how do you design a system that actually can respond and ebb and flow based on the content and based on what's being presented, and also based on the vibe. If we understand the result set and if we can add a taxonomy layer around the result set to the vibe, let's say that you've output video from a prompt. What if the interface starts to change and evolve based on that result set, based on where the AI is trying to predict you may want to go? What if it's telling you, like, hey, your initial prompt was X, and now I can see you might be wanting to go to Y? And also, there are other aesthetic shifts that you can make. So almost trying to act like your creative director as it responds in real time to the output that you're trying to achieve. Because design systems can evolve over time, the interface can compile to present that in a way that gets the user to the end goal faster. And so right now, our goal is to map the potential content result sets to ways to facilitate that magic flow, to facilitate the mean to an end in a way that shows something that feels more seamless, that feels more natural. And sometimes that's not a super long conversation. That can be a couple levers that you pull to get you to the end combo. But as the AI learns more about you and learns about your habits and the way that you want to interact with it, maybe it's a toggle, maybe it drags, maybe you continue to have the conversation. Maybe you're picking things from a color map as you add another layer to the video. Imagine the modality of inputs changing as it learns more about how you want to interact with it and how you create best. Is a fascinating space. We're very much playing around with this idea right now in a lot of our client work, and I can't wait to release something on what we found, because it's not just about a shiny demo of the UI compiling itself in real time. It's so much more about what the user is trying to achieve and getting to that magic moment when it works beautifully and it also produces the intended outcome.
I've messed around more than I'd expect to have with Runway and Midjourney, Suno, and it feels like there's a shift number six here that perhaps could be discussed, and is the shift in the reality of the user. Because I went into those products having a very deterministic goal, but I walked out with a very generative mindset in terms of what they do and what role they fill in my life. So Suno, I started using it as a bit of a joke. I sent my friend songs about him to kind of trip him up, and he's like, "Why is there a song with my name in it and it talks about my life?" And it was comedy. I've used Midjourney in all kinds of ways, and it's terrible at so many things, but things it's good at are things you wouldn't have expected. How do you reconcile this future where quite literally products are being shipped out? We're not sure what they're good at, but there's something that they're amazing at. And once people figure it out, it really changes everything.
I think that that's when you start to even see some of these earlier stage companies pivot, right? You start to see them realizing that the intended outcome wasn't necessarily what they're getting today, but they've hit on something that's even more magical and more exciting from a business and ROI perspective. And that's why I think the spirit of experimentation is so important. That's why I think that designers' challenge is to continue to experiment, because what you're going to be able to do is see how those things, even if you're just playing around at first and making silly songs, how it can change the way that you work with a variety of tools, not just the tool you're using in that moment. Because prompting is also an art, and curating and editing things down to having that high quality output is also an art. And I think that that's like one of the most inspiring things about all of this, is that if you become a person who sees the artistry in using these tools to the best of your advantage, but you're the one who's still in control, you're the one who's still the director, there's really cool potential for the future of what you might make. And we're still at the beginning stages of that. Absolutely.
Definitely. Suno is an app that I have a lot of connections to music, and it's easy to dislike what Suno represents. But the more that I use the application, the more I recognize that it's more akin to graffiti than making music. And it feels like we need to, as an industry, recognize that sometimes we don't need to understand what it is. We need to try it. We need to play with it. We need to see where it can go. It needs to be an organic process. Is that something that you encourage designers to do? And if so, like, how can they really build that in their practice? Because many people are not very good at divergent thinking.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's something I encourage to the point of if you're not doing it, like, please start tonight. Please start this weekend. And you don't have to try everything at once, too. And try the thing that feels most natural to you. And maybe that's something that's a little bit less barrier to entry, like creating a presentation with tone or gamma, as an example. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to drop into the community aspect of Midjourney right away and start prompting and sharing with the community. It's up to you to decide where you want to experiment. The thing that I love to see from designers today is when they give themselves that like 365-day brief. Like, maybe you just want to try 28 days to start. Don't sign up for a year if you don't want to do it. But give yourself a brief to do something and earn that mastery over time over the tool. And that can be a really cool way to, hey, drop into Suno, drop into Pika, drop into Midjourney, and try all of these different tools and then figure out how that would apply to your process as a solution set for you. Because just like Figma, Rive, Play, all of Protopie, all of these are just one tool in your arsenal. Yeah, I know that that's kind of the talk track right now. AI is just another tool, but AI is also a way to augment things that you didn't know were possible if you give it a chance to try. And if those who are designing on the other side are also designing responsibly, that's where the optimist in me comes in. We can create things that we didn't know were possible, right? And so it's a very exciting time. And I very much encourage designers to get out there and kick the tires as much as you possibly can.
I know this was a bit before your time, but when I go back and remember what Slack promised to do, it's like kill email. It was
Mhm.
such a wild claim. But
Yeah.
in fact, it did do a lot of that, and it took a while for people to come around. What can we learn from the past about the future?
One thing we can learn from the past, especially in the case of Slack, is that Slack wasn't first to market, but it was first to market at a scale where people really started to adopt it. And so when you start looking at that and you say, okay, right, because there was like Hit Chat and there's a couple other things going on at the time, what's the difference and what was the game changer for them? And it's a recipe of a lot of things, right? It's a combination of their relationships. It's a combination of founders who had had multiple tries at founding a company before and they had a hypothesis of what was going to solve this problem. It was also the experience itself and a novel interface that was something new and fun to play with that also cut out a lot of the noise. So it was doing the job that a lot of products should be doing for us today. So when you think about those learnings from Slack, applying them to what's happening with AI for productivity today, you can start to see the ones that are becoming game changers rising to the top. And the reason that they're rising to the top is because they're actually solving a real human problem and a simple human truth. Now, that doesn't mean that the evolution of these products always does that. Today, there's a lot of people who complain about their Slack intake, but Slack is now a natural part of the majority of all of our jobs, especially if you work in tech. And the communication and the need for communication still stands. And if you can design an experience that actually serves that simple human truth, you're going to have a game changing product if you've got the rest of the ingredients right.
If we were to chat again 1 year from now, what do you think would be different about your article?
You know, it's so funny. I very much see myself as a present minded person. I've always lived in the present. Some people live in the past, some people live in the future. I don't fancy myself a futurist at all. I do think that one of the things about this article that we're going to start to see is that trust is going to be bolstered either in a great way or actually hindered by some of the things that we start to see release in 2020. I think that we should stand up and put our money where our values are when it comes to these types of things and try to change the incentive for businesses to continue to do right by humans. Keeping us in the mix is the right way to go. So I think that the trust component of this will have a whole new set of considerations that we're going to need to talk about. These are hard ones. These are ethical considerations, right? These are considerations where you're going to have people who are divided over the potential decisions or the potential outcome or the potential impact. But it's in our face whether we like it or not. So the article will change very much in that way. I also really look forward to the generative component of this having a lot more tangible evidence of applications across the industry. And that's what I'm going to be super fascinated by is like, how do you handle generation and generative interfaces from healthcare to finance and that's risky, right? Finance, like you're getting into a whole other sector of consideration sets of how far is too far when we think about generative interfaces. But that's where a lot of the really interesting conversations will be had around user experience, because the potential for these experiences to become almost living and breathing because of the way that they change as the user needs and states change.
Something that really stands out, and I haven't thought about this until now as I'm watching these 5 mindset shifts on my screen, is
Mhm.
that for one part, I'm a data-minded person, Brittany is too. What you've put up here are very measurable brand qualities. Those sorts of things that you can track on a year-over-year basis and see, are we achieving our goals? And from the design function perspective, that's good because that's a way to validate the work and verify that you're actually achieving the end goal. Now, the other thing that is fascinating as I look at these, you've basically distilled the qualities of a human interaction to 5 pieces. And it makes me wonder if human centered design is over and we're actually trying to design human esque interfaces now. And it creates all kinds of paradoxes, but it is fascinating that now designers are not trying to build the best solution given all the constraints possible, but they're trying to build solutions that are as human as possible. What's your perspective on that?
I love this as a topic area. Remember when everything was like slick and shiny, and then all of a sudden you walked through Brooklyn and everybody had like an old timey mustache and was making craft cocktails? And everybody was making like they had a wood shop in the middle of the city and things like that. And that was like the harken back to like authenticity, right? Everything was about being authentic and handmade and craft. And that was years and years ago. Now, fast forward, I think we're getting to a new version of that. We're getting to this place where people want human experiences that are tangible. They don't want their shiny millennial perfection brands anymore. They don't want the pastels and the photo shoots. They want authenticity from their experiences and the brands that they interact with every day. So, why does authenticity matter? It's a word that gets thrown around way too much. But I do think when you're talking about this idea of more human experiences and designing for this almost human esque experience, you're looking for that through line and that quick through line to trust. Because if you start to see as a user, you start to see experiences that feel potentially too overshiny, right? It's like, what's under the hood? What should I be thinking about this that is not being presented to me in a really straightforward way? And the reason that I think this is happening is because social media has become an unpolished world. The less polished, the better sometimes. And that's where people really can connect with the experience. Now, that doesn't mean that what you design and the paths that you design can be janky. That has to be invisible and that has to be seamless. But when you think about the presentation and aesthetics, it's less about the bright, shiny object, and it's more about getting to that super simple human truth that still underlies the experience. And I'm really excited to see what we can do with that in the next couple of years, because I think we've just scratched the surface of it with, products that are trying their kind of pass at like what that might feel like. So there's definitely a lot of wearables who have tried to connect with people and tried to integrate themselves into this more humanish human computer interaction. We're not there yet. People don't trust that to like live on them. But eventually, I do think we will get to a point where people are willing to accept that addition to their daily lives if we've earned trust. And I also think that some people will never adopt that, and that's okay. And knowing that we shouldn't be creating different classes based on people who have adopted either this deep tech versus not is something that I think about a lot, because this tech can really surface the haves and the have nots very quickly. And so, how might we design experiences that can address that simple human truth, regardless of where somebody is on that spectrum?
That's something that I think about a lot as well, is how do you allow for people to opt in and out of experiences as well without being left behind? The word that I keep coming back to is this idea of empowerment, of data empowerment or experience empowerment, because part of it is also people wanting to, if they're engaging with these experiences, they also want to be able to say, well, okay, what do you remember about me? How can I turn off parts of it? How can I say, I want that here, but not there? And so I think that's like a really tricky part of figuring out like the humanity in those experiences as well.
The reality is we're trying to learn from people, and people are amazing at this stuff. They can context switch, they can understand what's happening, they can make an assessment even before you get there. Salespeople are amazing. It's crazy. Like Britt and I did a project on about resorts long ago. When you talk to someone who's at the top of their field in that, they can spot things from a mile away. And this technology, as great as it is, has a really hard time understanding something until you explicitly tell it. And that's a big failing of where we're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna be honest, like, I'm okay with that. Like, I still wanna be the one in control of the conversation with the machine, right? I think we all ultimately do. And so, how do you design for that? And what Brittany and RP, like, what you're reminding me of, this idea that is old as time, garbage in, garbage out. How, as a designer, can I design an experience for you if you don't give me data or you give me false data? I can't add relevancy and I can't build trust with you. I can't add value if I don't know enough about you. So it's this almost chicken or egg situation when we're dealing with first state. Imagine onboarding experience in the first state of a product experience. You've got to have enough data. You've got to also have enough training to be able to produce something that's of value on the other end. But if you don't have those things married up, what it ends up being is completely irrelevant to the end user, and they will ditch your product. Case in point, if you've ever asked AI to illustrate or draw you, if that AI does not have enough information about you, you will be surprised at what you're going to get, and you better be ready for something that you're probably not going to like and that will likely be slightly biased on the model that you're using. So that idea of we're only as good as the data that we can collect is something that's really important when we're designing for products, because data will be a new currency. That's not news. But as product designers, what we're learning is how we use that currency to increase trust and relevance in the experiences that we design.
This episode is brought to you by PH1 Consulting. Since 2012, we've been working with mid-size and large-size organizations. Our clients have included Microsoft, Mozilla, Dell, Spotify, the National Football League, and many more. We offer product strategy services to accelerate your adoption of new technologies and validate new ventures and products. We help you envision your North Star, co-create possibilities, and roadmap your way to success. As service design and futures thinking experts, we deliver a vision for how to take your product to the next level, particularly how to incorporate AI into workflows to augment the capabilities of your workforce. Please visit our website at ph1.ca to book an intro call to tell us about your project.
As much as we, as people who are working in this space, like to believe that so many people have had the experience to work with AI and these technologies in a meaningful way, there's still a lot of designers and product teams that haven't had a chance to work with a lot of generative AI products. A lot seem to be, maybe let's say when they are, they're focusing on much more narrow skill sets or capacities, right? And they're not really finding ways to deliver meaningful value because they're so narrowly focused on what's available or what people are talking about, or asking for. And it just seems like a lot of product teams have either forgotten how to be imaginative, or that the technology is maybe more difficult to work with than some of them expected. What's your perspective on how teams can best leverage AI when maybe they haven't really explored it well enough?
There's a few things that are in the way or also could help you depending on your orientation and where you work, right? So, for example, if you're a person who's really oriented towards exploring and trying things out, you're not going to let your big enterprise company AI policy get in your way, right? Like, do not put anything that is proprietary into AI models. OpenAI tells you that very obviously. Your data will be trained upon. Anything that you put into those fields, anything you talk about is essentially theirs to train on. And you just have to get realistic about that. So that's number one. So some people, and I hear this a lot from friends who work at Fortune 500 companies, we're not allowed to use it in a meaningful way. And I hear that. And that's difficult because, to my point earlier, experience is everything. But I think like gotta go apply it in your personal life. You've got to give yourself a side project to go test something out. For example, like, oh gosh, this was like 2 years ago at Metalab, we did a project where we couldn't apply any AI to our actual client work. We couldn't say, we're going to go use these early tools on your work because of obviously the intellectual property concerns. So, what we did is we created a fake brief. And the brief was design an app in 2 weeks to keep kids safe on the internet. How do you do it? And whatever your output is and your outcome is up to you. So you can code if you get there. You can design the brand if you want. And what this team ended up doing is using only AI the first week. And that first week, the results were surprising, also amazing because they got some really amazing outputs. But obviously, nothing that we would ever ship, and the quality was laughable. But the second week, they made it great. And they took that human intervention and literally there was a team that created something that I would feel good about bringing forward to the market in 2 weeks. So my suggestion to anybody who feels blocked by that, give yourself a project that is a personal project in a passion area. So you feel like you want to do that in your free time. That's one way to crack into it, regardless of where your barriers are based on the context of where you work and their policies. But you've got to do it, is my number one recommendation. And then I think for those who may be able to apply it, but don't quite know how or struggling to do that, the best way is to continue to try it based on problems you have. Let's say you're working on a prototype and you need a little bit of zhuzh to an animation. I literally just got out of a meeting where one of my directors talked to Claude about enhancing that animation and got an output that was something that was demoable to the client. Using it in those places that, number one, don't break any rules because it's a weird world out there. Don't make your employer mad, but also challenge your typical process and integrate it into your process because we're getting to a point where there could be a tool for that. And if you find that the tool doesn't give you an outcome you like, that's still great information, right? It's not ready for prime time. And then you can be the one who is advising your peers and coworkers, don't use this for that, use it for that. Here's where you want to spend your time. You can be way more efficient with this AI tool here. And having that point of view and opinion is super valuable, especially to anyone who's leading a design team.
These new AI platforms, Cloud, GPT, Perplexity, they're all amazing as a reasoning layer. But it feels like right now we're so obsessed with how can we get the most out of that reasoning layer, outputs that are useful, that it feels like we might be ignoring the brewing battle that's going to happen with design, which is traditionally there's always been this ontological layer, which is explaining what things mean. And designers have fully owned that. They've been responsible for explaining how a technical solution can be useful, explaining why and how it needs to be used, explaining what your relationship needs to be. And slowly, and probably at increasing speed, designers are going to be handing that power over to engineers. And it's going to create a bit of an uncomfortable tension where there's probably going to be a brewing amount of designers who, brooding, probably the better word, wishing they had more control over that ontological piece, but they gave the keys away because they've been kind of asleep at the wheel. It's not to fault the design field at all, but I don't think people understand how important it is to be that unlock for the user. And that has been the role of design. We've been so focused on just shipping product that we forgot that responsibility.
It's fascinating that you're talking about this idea of feeling like you've lost it or given away the keys. Because in my experience, there's two types of designers. One who wants those keys, one who wants to literally be through the end days of shipping a product in QA. There's some designers too, and a lot of designers at Metalab who are like, I don't want to spec this thing. I want to move on, you know? And so it really depends on where you sit as a designer and how much you care about each piece of the process, where you're going to be potentially threatened, frankly, of where AI may subsume you in efficiency and may take those keys away from you, per se, of things that you love. Now, that's just a reality that we have to deal with. That said, though, figuring out where you can apply the uniquely human qualities that you have are going to be the most important part of how we're figuring out this brave new world. I am not one to say that, oh, AI will only take production away from us, as an example. It won't. There are things that AI can already do from a research perspective. Brittany, I am sure you have seen this in depth, that there's so much that AI is already able to do that is around the generative thinking part of our job. But that said, we are the ones who are the curators. We are the ones with the editing capabilities and the aesthetics that are going to be able to connect to that deeply seated human need that ultimately is about what you ship. So if you're an end-to-end 0 to 1 designer, there are pieces of your process that you should be looking at right now. What do I want to hold and what do I want to give away? And then what am I going to be forced to give away because of efficiency's sake? If you ignore it, I guarantee those who pay you will figure it out. And so if you're on the forefront of having that conversation and saying, here's what works, here's what doesn't, you're going to be on the up and up and you're going to be seeing a value because you've got a POV on how to integrate this because it's happening whether we like it or not. So, and this is very much like a tough love conversation for me, right? My nightmare is to have design just go away. But I know that nightmare is not going to happen. How exactly it will manifest, I think we're all still trying to figure that out together. But I believe if you're a person who really loves your job and really loves design, you're going to figure out a way to become indispensable. It doesn't mean you're immune to economic circumstances like layoffs and all of the drama that's happening in our space, but it does mean that you're of value to someone who's trying to ship something that's meaningful. And as long as we keep, as consumers, as long as we keep voting with our eyeballs, our engagement, and our money towards experiences that are valuable, I do think that there's going to be a really solid place for designers in this new future.
Thinking about point of view, you just mentioned that you've had the amazing fortune and you've earned the right to work with so many great big brands and exciting startups. Some of those include Midjourney, The Atlantic, Coinbase, Suno, some of the front leading orgs in each of their industries. I'd love to know, what are some examples you've seen of how AI gets leveraged well, and what are some examples of the cringeworthy AI, just so we can place this in more specifics of what is the future of good design and bad design when you have these tools that make average so easy.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such a fun question. Okay. So first, like the places where there are experiences that I'm very impressed by are ones that give tangible value to people. What does that mean? We worked with, for example, Tally enables people to lower their epigenetic age. So, with a variety of factors that are including behaviors, habits, genetics, anything that has to do with like the healthcare spectrum, what they do is they take a baseline and they monitor that for you, but then they help you lower your epigenetic age. What that means is not necessarily longer lives, even though that could lead to it. It's quality of life. And when we think about how do we introduce experiences with AI that are enabled by AI that help humans, that is a very tangible way. Like, I can't think of anything better than making life better and higher quality for people, especially as they age. So that's one way that I'm very impressed by. But it doesn't have to be as like heavy as potentially life or death or having diseases in your older age, right? It also can be about saving you time day to day. So experiences that help you in any way, shape, or form. So for example, I love the note-taking app Granola AI. That thing is a game changer. And these best in class experiences of people just having time saved are the things that I'm really impressed by. But those are also sort of just the tip of the iceberg, right? I think what I'm most excited about are the experiences that are going to help us, for example, sleep better, because sleep is such a key unlock to your health. Those experiences that are going to actually help you identify cancer or risk for cancer. And, I used to tell designers, like, hey, we're not curing cancer here, but I would love to work on a project where we're actually unlocking the potential to save human lives with that. And we've had a couple that I'm not allowed to talk about that are of that genre and addressing different age groups through the years that actually can make people's lives better. And that's where I really think, okay, that's like such an amazing application of it. The silly applications, like go to a chat bot and have them talk shit to you, it's kind of funny, whatever. Like if you've got a sense of humor, you can poke around in that. But the thing that's, I wouldn't really call this cringe, but the thing that I'm very interested in I don't know if you two have seen this and if your listeners have seen this, but the PDF to brain rot apps that are out there. Oh my gosh, they're so funny. Okay, so it's
I
like,
haven't, but now I need to look this up.
yeah. Okay, so
Brain rot, by the way, being the 2024 Oxford Dictionary entrant.
oh, wasn't that hilarious?
It was the word of the year. Yeah.
I bet there were some battles in that room to decide if that was the word of the year for sure. So PDF to brain rot, and look it up. It's super fascinating. So you know what Notebook LM does from Google, right? Fascinating. You can take all these disparate sources and have them spin it into a podcast for you. Alone, that's amazing. And I was lucky enough to learn a little bit about the background of how these types of experiences with our clients get manifested. Sometimes it's teams who are imagining them in a hack day event. Sometimes somebody just has an amazing idea and some of the top brass listens and they implement it. Those types of things I think are groundbreaking. And the idea that you're able to take all these disparate sources, turn it into another medium, actually enables people to learn faster or learn in the modality that they're most comfortable with. But the PDF to brain rot one is funny. It's actually apps that do just that. It's kind of a rip off of Notebook, right? But it turns it into playing video games or like ASMR in the background. And to me, that's like, all right, I'm trying to learn like physics or whatever. And here I am with a Minecraft track in the background. And how does that work? There's almost just like this weird cognitive dissonance between those two. But I also think it's super fascinating because the generations that are coming up in this era are going to challenge ways of learning. And attention spans are so thin. And so how do we make sure that we're growing the next generations of people who are going to take over this world and teaching them the things that they need to know? And I think these different ways to learn are kind of fascinating. So the brain rot thing is a little bit exploitation too, PDF to brain rot. Like a lot of these apps are actually just taking your data and probably serving ads most likely. And so that's a little bit of a like questionable, that's a little sus, but I still think the concept of it is very interesting and something I'm watching.
Cool. So let's bring it back to then the great use cases, right? And for the people who are listening who are not super well versed with Metalab and just how excellent the work is that you do. Like your team has such a high quality standard for, I think what you said is you really have a lot of consideration for what gets put out into the world. So teach us, right? It'd be great to understand, what is your team's design practice? Like walk us through a couple of examples of how you move from a client brief through to developing a vision and creating concepts.
This is a tough one to answer without giving away the secret sauce, to your point, RP. But I think that ultimately so many clients come to us on a spectrum of readiness first when you think about a vision. Some literally have an idea on the back of a cocktail napkin, or it's just living in their brain, and we need to make that real. Some, quite polished and developed, and will have vision decks. They'll have their VC decks where they've secured funding. They'll potentially have some like shape around it. And depending on how developed those two are, kind of depends on how we have to drop in. Our number one goal, no matter what design problem is in front of us, is to question it and make sure that we feel like, okay, this thing that we're looking at does this make sense? Do we believe this makes sense in the future? And so if I'm given a vision document or if I'm given a VC deck, I want to poke holes in a lot of the hypotheses that they have. And it's only in service of being a great partner. It's only in service of getting them what we think they need in order to be successful. Because we design for an outcome. We design for an intended outcome that is going to basically be rocket fuel for their business, but also align with what people want and need. And those two things can sometimes be at odds. So you have to have that tough conversation around that tension as you're shaping a vision. And we find the best way to have that conversation is to make it tangible right away. So when we start engaging with clients, sometimes they're pretty surprised. Majority of the time we're designing week one, and we're designing some things that may totally get thrown away, but we're designing a hypothesis for what the solution may be so that we've got something tangible to look at and to not be super precious about. I think that when you also think about AI and what AI can do to make you less precious about solutions and less precious about the work, that's a beautiful thing. While we still make sure that we're venerating the importance of craft in the right place at the right time. So a little bit of background is into what stage is the client at. But I believe that the magic is in the making. And so you get to the making as quickly as possible, no matter what the fidelity, so that you can have that conversation. And if you're a founder, that's the best way to make your dream come to life. You don't want to see 1,000-page decks. You've already done all of this thinking. You want to start to hold it and feel it and really make sure that you're getting the value out of a partner like us. So just a little bit of insight into the way that we work.
So I guess reading between the lines, is your impression that a lot of the service vendors, agencies, consultancies have become too yes oriented? Because I know for myself, Brittany would often say that I bring the most value to clients when I tell them no, I tell them why not, I challenge things and I make them rethink things, and they have to really dig through, well, why do we actually believe that? So has this industry become too much of a yes industry?
I mean, I don't want to bag on the industry because shit's hard out there, right? Like agencies are getting squeezed left and right. And it's tough to run a service-based business. It's a very inefficient business model, right? But that said, I don't think that we should design and build things just because we can. Very much I'm a believer in like just because you can AI doesn't mean you should. And so holding that and I know that creative people and especially people in agencies have loads of opinions on what's going to be right by the user, what's going to be right by humanity. Sometimes that up against a very challenging economic climate can be problematic. And when you are a person who's responsible for a P&L, that can be a decision between keeping your people or having to lay them off. And I just am very real about this stuff because it is the climate that we live in. Luckily today, we're in a great place where we are cruising, we are keeping growth solid, steady, and we're lucky enough to have some of the most amazing clients in the world to keep us going. But I also think that that yes can turn into a yes and, right? A little bit of improv there. It can turn into a no, here's what I'd rather do for you. But ultimately, you still work for them, right? And if you are in a service-based model, making sure that you are building those relationships, earning that trust of the person who is actually your client, and then showing them that your only goal is to give them the most killer app you possibly can find out of this design problem that they brought you. They will begin to trust you, and it doesn't have to be a yes only conversation.
Amazing answer. Now, bringing the conversation back down to the designer level, we've been talking about the industry and big strategies and visions, but I'm sure a lot of designers are listening and they're a little unsure, they're a little overwhelmed. They're just, I don't know what to do. A lot of designers I've spoken to personally just they don't even want to bother thinking about AI because there's too much to learn. There's too much change happening at one time. What do you personally have as advice to help these people, whether they're product people, design people, research people,
to help them navigate this new paradigm?
Man, I mean, when I first hear that, I feel for them. I really do. My read on it can be either it's an apathetic reaction or a fear based reaction. I also have been there at different times in my career. I've been lucky enough to today say, yeah, I'm going to have the confidence to go make a mistake. And if I make that mistake or if I fail, that's okay. And so getting really, really clear about why you do this job is number one. If you're doing this job for a paycheck, I would say like you need to find something else to focus on and another way to make money because at the core you have to have passion. And if your passion for this work starts to dwindle, you need to take a break. If your passion for solving the problem all of a sudden is not clear, you got to take a break. You got to think of another way to challenge whatever you've got going on inside back to getting that energy towards problem solving. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself left behind. And managers see it, people see that, but they also are invested in you growing and learning and becoming the best version of yourself. So work with your managers to do that, right? I'm a big believer in not just managers for managers' sake, leaders in the work. So we're making sure if you're a young designer or even a designer who's not quite sure about this brave new world or a little sus about it all, find somebody who inspires you and work alongside them. And if you can't find them and work alongside them, find them in social media and learn from them as you go. Because luckily, we have this abundance of access to so many different people, personality types, right? Characteristics that when you find your person who is your inspiration, whether you have direct access to them or not, it can be a game changer for your career. So you've got to find something that's a spark for you. It can be a person, it can also be a process or a problem to solve. But if you don't find that for yourself, I just don't know if that's the career for you. And you should continue to seek out advice from a mentor or from someone that you trust as you go through that, because it is very much a mental talk track for a lot of people. I'm a big advocate for mental health. We've designed many solutions for mental health across the spectrum. I've been lucky enough to work with Yale trained professors on working through these actual product design problems and dealing with mental health. And I do think there's a connection between this feeling of overwhelm to how we see the world ourselves. And if you start to really crack into that, I think you're going to find that you're going to be stronger for it if you go there.
So I want to do the improv thing and say yes and. You've
Yeah.
talked about spark, you talked about passion, you talked about finding some inspirational. And many people are probably shaking their heads saying, I don't have any of those. And
Mhm.
there's a fourth option, which is that you might be in the wrong culture. We talked about this with Peter Moorholtz a couple months ago, and the reality is designers are being pushed too hard, too fast. They're being put out of their comfort zones, and they're losing sight on why they even started in that profession. And the reality is it could be the wrong culture. Now, I'm wondering, as a mentor to someone, how can you help someone decide and define, is it that I haven't tapped into my passion or I'm in the wrong culture?
Oh, I love this question, this conversation many times. And I think like the tough love from me comes out that if you're in the wrong culture and you know it's not good for you, you've got to design your way out of it. You're a designer. You've got to figure out another way to find a culture that maps to what you need and what you want. But that said, sometimes there's a little bit of that boiling frog situation for people. And I think that that's how burnout is created too, where you're in this culture, you want to make it work, you've got the coworkers you love, you've got some good things, but there's also a lot that is impacting you in a way that's overwhelming. And you feel like, wow, like I cannot continue to generate at this pace that they're requiring of me or whatever the problem is. Right. And so my ultimate guidance is you advocate for yourself first. So if you're starting to feel that your culture might be a disconnect, absolutely start having conversations with recruiters, put yourself out there, make sure that you are creating your own personal brand. And I don't say personal brand so that you can become an influencer, because I definitely do not do that for myself, not into that. But make sure that you're advocating for yourself. What advice would you give to somebody else going through this exact problem? And because this situation can be so contextual, seeking out help from friends, help from family, help from mentors is a way to help you see the sort of third party version of what you're going through, so that you can assess if you want to make a big move versus working on something yourself or finding that L&D thing that's going to give you that next rev, that next spark. So it's a very, very nuanced problem, frankly. And there's not a lightning rod answer to that, but I'm a very big believer in culture. And once you start to see the culture, and you absolutely will in your role, you need to decide if it's an energetic connect to you or not. And if it's not energetically aligned, do not waste your time as long as you possibly can, and put your energy towards, yes, do that job, but find the thing that's going to energetically align to you, because you'll be fighting an uphill battle if you don't. And that's not worth anybody's time. And employers can feel it too when it's not aligned.
Yeah. And do you find that you've seen many instances where people individually are able to shift those cultures or to have an impact to create it to become more of a culture that they're looking for? Or do you think that's generally just like pushing a rock up a mountain?
I think it really depends on the culture itself and what are the things that are true and that are immovable versus what are movable, right? So scale of company can be a concern, right? Scale of company can be a big factor here. But I've seen people who absolutely have changed their tune by getting involved in ERGs, as an example, or hosting like portfolio review nights and giving back to the design community, or finding that right mentor or coachee connection that actually is a big unlock for them. There's lots of levers, but depending on the context of where you are, you have to figure out what the most impactful lever might be that you want to pull first to get you towards whatever that version of next step is. I think it's almost like a misnomer, like, oh, I'm happy in my job. Okay, right? Like happy in your job. I think it's so deeply connected to our lives that if those things are all happening for you, amazing, and enjoy it when it does. But contentment and satisfaction and fulfillment to me are much more meaningful, because that fulfillment can sustain you when the ups and downs ultimately happen in your life, personally and professionally.
This moment AI seems like a really important one because you can really extract what a culture is depending on how they plan to use AI in their strategy. If they're trying to use it to automate workflows, or if they're trying to use it to improve conversions versus redefine the entire relationship they have with their industry and humanity, that says a lot about the organization, Ross. So think critically about what you're being asked to do. And we've heard from many of our guests that sometimes it's okay to say no because ethics is more important now than ever in terms of how and why we should be using AI.
100%. 100%. Like, I know that we've talked about misleading patterns, right, in design. And you can very quickly go down a path of misleading a user if the end goal is to exploit people. And I think that designers get into this work because they care deeply about the human experience and want to make it better. So when you start to see those things, ultimately, like, you still have agency in this career. There are lots of external pressures that are happening to us as designers right now. But my charge to people is that if you start to see and feel that, believe people when they show you who they are. Believe them. And then you need to internalize that and figure out if that's right for you to be aligned with them.
Thank you so much. Final question here is where's the best place for people to follow along with what you're up to, what you're writing, the amazing examples of work you put out? Where's the best place for them to connect?
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation. I actually was hoping it would last longer. So it's been an absolute joy to chat here with you both. And I would love to see people in all of the places. The place I'm most active socially, though, is LinkedIn, for better, for worse. I got a text from somebody I used to work with the other day, and she's like, I think I'm becoming a LinkedIn girly. And I'm like, oh my God, this cracks me up. I never thought I would say that, but that is where I am. And then of course, like on all the socials, the Metalab socials, we're pushing out things that try to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain into things that we're doing and what we think is interesting. So definitely follow us there. And then Sara Vienna on most of the socials like Insta, X, or Blue Sky. I'm even kicking around in. So just try me everywhere, but no, I don't check it every day.
So awesome. Thank you.
This episode was hosted by Arpi Drag Figueroa, founder and head of product strategy at PH1 Research, and Brittany Hobbs, VP Insights at Huge. Please make sure to subscribe to our Substack to never miss an episode. On the Design of AI Substack, you'll also receive more strategic insights and recommended products, as well as announcing events soon to come. You can find us at designofai.substack.com.